All right. Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of Warp Surge Radio, Nurgle Model Tips and Tricks. I'm Nick from Hexfleet Virulus. You can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/HexFleetVirulus, on Instagram at HexFleetVirulus, and of course here on YouTube on youtube.com/HexFleetVirulus. Thank you for joining me. We've had 3 great episodes, really positive feedback. This is episode 4. A lot of people over the last 6 or 7 years that I've been sculpting, converting Nurgle, have asked me to do some sort of tutorials or lessons, or just to give some insight on how I make my models. And so, having covered a lot of different topics, the first 3 episodes, Slaanesh most recently, and some combos with the new Vigil Sublay stuff, but also just tournament updates, going over lists, going over the LVO. I thought in this episode I would do something a little different. I would do something that is for all of you who love Nurgle and who love modeling and converting and sculpting. And as people know, I'm not the best painter. I work together with Brandon Palmer of GMM Studios, my favorite commission painter. But I am, I think, at this point, very good at sculpting. And while I can't freeform sculpt whole models the way some people can, what I am able to do is sculpt Nurgle really well. And I've learned how to sculpt a variety of different things, and I think I'm pretty handy at converting with my huge bits box. So today I'm going to go over some of the models that I've made and give you some insight into what I think about when I'm envisioning a new Nurgle model and what I might want to add to it, what I might want to take away, where I'm going to sculpt, how I'm going to sculpt, and how I'm envisioning the painting process. Even though I don't do it myself, I'm always thinking when I go through the model in terms of how is this going to look when it's fully painted? Is it going to look like it's put together well? Or is it going to look like I tried too hard to create a Nurgle model that just has too many things on it? And so here in the background, I've got my Nurgle Fire Raptor that's magnetized, and I've got my Knight, my Renegade Knight of Nurgle, that I also have magnetized. And so let me just, before I start throwing up pictures of specific models and close-ups, including some work in progress pictures I have of that Fire Raptor, let me talk a little bit about what is behind my general philosophy when I create a model. The number one thing, like I was hinting at a minute ago, is I'm always thinking, hey, look, I can turn this model into whatever I want, right? I can put as much green stuff on it as I want. I can go nuts and put 20 different kits worth of bits on it. There's nothing stopping me, right? But is it a good idea? It's really hard to find that fine line when you're working on a chaos army of any kind, but especially Nurgle. It's hard to make that decision between, hey, is this too much? Is it going to look silly to have all these different things on it? Or is it too little? Does it look like, I only apply details or creativity on one part of the model rather than having it on all parts of the model? And by the way, if you're in chat, feel free to say something. Let me know that you can hear me, that the audio is working, and feel free to throw out questions anytime. And so what I always think about when I'm sculpting or converting a model is I want it to look like it came like that, which is counterintuitive, right? You want your model to look a little unique, but what I want is I want it to look so well done and so in its own way uniform across the model that if I show it to someone, and this happens a lot with my models, if I show it to someone who's not familiar with the kit, who's not familiar maybe with Warhammer, they look at it and they assume that's the way it's supposed to look, that it came like that. And then I always have to say, no, I actually did a bunch of stuff to it, but you want it to look like something that could have been created by Games Workshop if they had wanted to add those extra details, that extra bit of flair to it, right? If it looks like something that, that is just hodgepodge thrown together without a lot of thought, without really thinking about the process before you begin, and it looks like something that, some amateur made at home, that kind of defeats the purpose. Or if it looks overdone, like it's got too much stuff stuck to it, that also defeats the purpose, right? You want it to kind of speak for itself without being overbearing. And I think I've had so many times where I'm working on my models the last 7 years where I'm like, I have a bunch of stuff on here already, and I really want to put this one detail on there, but I just can't find a way or a spot on the model where that sculpted detail or that extra bit I wanted to glue on is going to look right. It's going to look like I forced it, and you never want it to look forced. You always want it to look like it's natural and flows together. So let me go through a couple of specific examples of what I mean. And a lot of people love the fire raptor that I have here on the screen. So I'm going to throw up a couple of other photos here. Give me just a second since we're doing this live. So let's see if I can get my normal screen up on the background here, and then I'll start throwing up a couple of photos for you guys. One second. Here we go. All right. Now, let's go in here and add some of these photos that I prepared for you guys that we're going to walk through today. We're going to talk first about the fire raptor. And here is a photo, more close up, of my fire raptor when it was still a work in progress. So, if you look on here, you're going to see that there's a couple of things. In terms of the bits that I've added here, you know, I've got parts from the Mauler Fiend Forge Fiend kit. I have a lot of parts from the Warhammer Fantasy Nurgle models, which I really recommend, from the Glotkin. I've got Plague Drone wings. I've got some Forge World stuff. Just a little bit of everything. And a lot of times the way I start with a model is, hey Neil, good to see you. Yeah, let me know if that audio is working okay. I see a lot of people just moving in and out of the stream here, so I want to make sure that people can actually hear me. Perfect. All right. And I'm also actually, so I don't have to keep looking at the screen here, I might throw up that live chat in a little bit. But if you look at this model here, the way I start with the conversion is obviously first I build the full kit minus any parts that I might want to switch out, in which case I'm already, like for my Mauler Fiends, I left off some of the arms, and just at that stage already, I started building in some of the Warhammer Fantasy models and sculpting them straight on. But if I'm just building a kit and then I'm going to make it Nurgle, I just finished a kit, more or less as it comes. And then I go through my bits box and I look at all the Nurgle stuff, and usually I have a good idea already of how I want this to look at the very end. And I just kind of find the pieces that get me there. So, for example, here, you know, I just started looking. I said, okay, you know, I've got some Tyranid bits. I'm going to glue them on the back. And then I start looking at wings, and I start looking at all these tusks on the front and the back. And I move stuff around a lot. I have it in my hand, and I kind of dry fit, and I just start poking it into little different nooks and crannies, because even if you have a smaller model, like a single infantry model, there are so many little just nooks, crannies, holes, edges, curves, where you could potentially add a bit and glue it on there. And even if it's only on there a little bit, you can fill in any gaps with green stuff and then let that solidify, and then go over that once you have the foundation, and then put the details on just the outer layers. So just start poking around and dry fitting wherever you want with all these bits, and then maybe before you glue some of them, take out a couple more bits and then say, well, if I add this thing here, then maybe on the other side I can add this. And then you start to get a feel for it. And a lot of times you can just, if the bit kind of fits already, which is a good sign that that's maybe something you should add to your Nurgle model, then you can glue it straight on. Now, sometimes, you know, depending on where you want to attach it to your model, you might have to clip or cut it a little bit, but you don't have to get it that perfect, you know, in order to get a point where you can hold it and glue it. And then any gaps that you need to fill, you can just go in and put solid green stuff. and so that'll get you there. And so I tend to do, before I do any detail sculpting, I go in and I just add bits constantly to the model. And when I'm done adding all the bits I want, or most of them, you can always go back later, then I go and I add the green stuff. And I just green stuff in any gaps to make sure everything is solid, and that I have a solid kind of, lump of clay or whatever, however you want to think of it, everywhere where I want to sculpt. And it's not just where I added bits that I'm going to start sculpting. I'm also going to sculpt like mounds or rolling waves or something on the model. If there's a place where I don't want to just sculpt a flat layer on something, I want some texture, I want some variety. I do this a lot with my bases. So if you ever look at for example, any of my grade on clean ones that I've done, it might be a little hard to see there, but you can see there that I sculpted that base from hand. And what I did here is, it doesn't look as good if I just sculpt the same thing on this huge flat base the whole time. And so I go in first and I create kind of layers and mounds and hills on that flat surface, and I let all of that dry. And then the only thing, and this is important for any sculpting that you do ever, and it took me a long time to figure this out, and I wish I had realized it earlier in sculpting Nurgle or anything else. It's one of the biggest tips to saving time and to having good results. It's the person looking at the model is only ever going to see what's on the very surface. And I used to just take a huge amount of green stuff and then just put it wherever I want on the model and try to go with my tools and sculpt all the way deep in, up to like half an inch or something, and just do that all at once. And then I'd have to worry about, I'm sculpting the top, but the bottom isn't set and it's all moving around. And sometimes you want to do that if you want to create holes or something like that. But most of the time you don't need to do that. You can make, just flat, unsculpted green stuff over most of the model to get 90% of the fit in. And then all you have to do, once it's the right elevation and size and shapes and curves, then you just go in and you do the final detail layer, which takes the most amount of time. And you just put, you can be a very thin layer of green stuff, and then you put that over everything. And then you only have to worry about, really perfectly sculpting and getting the details right on that very outer layer. And it's easier because you've got this hard layer underneath already, and stuff isn't moving around on you. And you can put more pressure on that detail layer to get the lines right on whatever you're doing when you've got that solid foundation underneath. And so that's a huge important tip. I think for anything that you're ever going to sculpt, especially if you do what I do on these Nurgle models and sculpt like mold or mushrooms or just some sort of tendrils or whatever weird chaos Nurgle thing you want to do. So the other thing I want to add is, particularly when you're at that final detail stage that I'm talking about, where you're really putting in the fine details, don't be limited to just green stuff. Think about stuff that's just in your household or stuff that you might pick up at Hobby Lobby that would save you time. And so very early on when I started sculpting my Death Guard and my Nurgle demons, I would try to just hand sculpt all these little balls for like fungus balls or mold or whatever to create that kind of texture that I have on some of my old obliterators. If you've seen those on one of the arms where it looks like a bunch of those plastic balls in a McDonald's that the kids play in, right? And I tried to make almost by hand and then glue them on, and that is a total waste of time. Look here at this Fire Raptor, right? I have all these little micro beads. They're like $1 or $2. You can get them on Amazon. They're from China. You get 1 million of them. They come in different sizes, different colors, and then you can just stick them straight into the green stuff. And they look great. They come in different sizes. You can mix them up. And even better, a lot of these, they come not in a full ball, but they come cut in half, so the bottom's flat. Makes it super easy to put into your green stuff. I put it in there when I'm doing that final layer. I sculpt around it. Really easy, saves me time. And you can use all sorts of other materials in your sculpting when you're doing, and you're converting generally. So be creative. Just go take a trip to Hobby Lobby or look through, your arts and crafts box or something your family has. There's so much stuff in there that you can put on a model or that you can use on the model at the same time that you're sculpting that will make it look great, that will save you time. And so let's look, for example, at another side of this model. And so here I've got the underside of it, and you can see there a little bit more in detail what it looks like when I put those micro beads in. And you can see there that, I have these little details like those plastic guts. I think that's from a Great Unclean one or something, that are hanging off kind of the front underside of the model. And before I started sculpting the detail onto that, I first put in just a layer of green stuff, no sculpting, just flatten it like I'm working with, clay as a kid or something. And I had that on there. And then I had enough space and it came out far enough that it would look natural when I started sculpting that kind of moss stuff on it. Another thing that I want to say looking at this that you should probably keep in mind is when you're sculpting, especially when you're sculpting that detail layer like I have here, I can't tell you how much time this takes to do it like this. But I think if you want your efforts to be worthwhile in the long run and to look really good, you probably want to do it in small sections and just do it really well. And I see a lot of people who are like, here's my Nurgle sculpting. And they're just going to take, some piece, it's fairly big, and they're just going to slap it on the side of like a vehicle, and they're just going to put, a few little pushes of their sculpting tool in there, create some slashes, maybe pull at the ends a little bit, make it look a little bit like a sponge, and they're like, hey, there's my fungus on the Nurgle model. And I think the difference between that and something like what I've got here is what I do takes way more time, but it's going to look so much better at the end, even before the model's painted. And so I would say is work in small pieces of green stuff at a time, but spend a lot of time on it and really do a lot of physical pushes with the sculpting tool and break it up constantly, move it around. The more you break up the green stuff, especially if you're trying to create kind of a moss look or a fungus look like what I have here, but even if you're doing something else like hair or chainmail, whatever it is, the more you push on it, the better. Because when you first sculpt those two parts of material together to create your green stuff, it's going to look pretty flat because you're trying to merge them. And so what you want to do is break that up as much as possible so that it looks natural instead of you just sticking a piece of clay on a model or something like that. And if you guys have any questions while you're watching, throw them into the chat. I've got the chat open here. And so those are, I think, some key things to keep in mind. Let me show you another angle here, just so you can see a little bit more. So there you have at the front a little bit more, again, of what I'm talking about. And something here that I think you can see on the sides. Well, there's a couple of things here. So a lot of times you might not be sure what parts of the model you want to put that green stuff on, right? You could put it here, you could put it there. And so a lot of times I like to let the model guide me in a way. I like to look at, okay, where did I not glue this model right? Forge World is easy because Forge World doesn't always fit right. The Fire Raptor kit is kind of famous for that. So are some other kits, and so that's easy. So if you've ever put a Fire Raptor together, you know that there's just certain parts that don't line up. And so here, that's where I put a lot of the green stuff. And I just said, hey, look, if it's not fitting together that well, one, I want to cover it, and two, that's probably the place where, you've got maybe two sides of a plane coming together or something like that. Where would the cracks in the armor be? If this thing was full of the warp or had like a Nurgle demon in it, what parts of this model would be rotting from the inside out and stuff is just going to burst out and it's just kind of slowly taking over the model. And so I let the physical architecture of the model tell me that this is where I start with the green stuff. And then I build from there. And after I do it for a while, I can always look and say, hey, I want to extend this, draw it out across the model or something like that. So that's the first thing I want to point out here. And then the second thing is, if you look here closely, you're going to see right at the side here that I work very hard not just to create detail and break up the green stuff that I have in the center part, but at the very edges, right? I pull on the green stuff and I stretch it out, I bend it, I curve it, I maybe poke at it a bit with a sharp end, and if it doesn't look good, I cut it off and I stretch another piece. You want whatever part that you put green stuff on, you want that to blend naturally into the surfaces that are going to stay clean. And the only way to do that is to do it in lots of little places. And not have any just flat surfaces that you just pull and leave. Anything that you pull to kind of transition from the model or the plastic or the resin to the green stuff, you want to break that up a little bit, just like you did the main part. And you want some diversity so that it looks natural and organic. And another thing here is you notice that I have a mushroom at the front. Some people are very good at doing mushrooms. I'm not that fast. But whether you're making a mushroom or anything else, never just try to sculpt it from scratch exactly the way it looks. There's usually always an easier way to do it that's pretty counterintuitive. And I actually found some tutorials online on YouTube that helped me with this, and one guy in particular who I think was a very good Nurgle sculptor, and his technique, a lot easier, a lot faster, saves you a lot of time, but you never would have thought of it, right? And what he does is he'll create like a little ball of green stuff on top of the green stuff he's already using, or maybe like a half ball or something, like a tennis ball that's cut in half, and he'll make it pretty big, and he'll put it there, and he'll make it even, and then he'll take a very sharp, long tool, like a needle or something, and then he'll go into the very surface of that ball at the very top and slowly start pushing in while going in circles. And that's going to slowly push out that ball while you're working on it, and it's going to create this kind of effect like you're creating a like you're doing clay sculpting. You're creating like a bowl or something, and you can choose kind of how far to push it out, and you don't go all the way down. And then you're going to have this kind of bowl type effect at the top, and then you're already pretty close to a mushroom. Then you just go and you take a tool that has like a flat end or something, or maybe even take the same needle tool if you want to be working with a lot of precision. And usually I use the needle tool. And then you go on the edge of this kind of bowl that you have, and then just on the outside, you just kind of start pushing it underneath and then flattening it. And that's going to give you that ring at the top that creates the mushroom. And then you can just kind of push. You can move it around on the outside, on the bottom, underneath the ring, or you can go on the inside and kind of move it around. And if it looks too flat, doesn't really look like a mushroom, then you go again under that ring on the outside and you take your needle tool or whatever tool you have and you pull it up. You pull it up a little higher, you move it out, and then you're going to get a real mushroom ring-like effect. And then you can even go on the inside of the mushroom and you can just maybe, do some scratches and stuff. Maybe pull the upper lip down a little bit into the inside of the mushroom, give it kind of this organic look. And so that's a really easy way to do mushrooms. You could probably do several at once if you make a couple balls at once near each other and you just go one into the other and do that. It only takes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get a mushroom right. And that's so much easier to just try to make them in multiple parts or doing something else. And so if you want to know more about that, just Google Nurgle mushrooms or sculpting Nurgle. You'll find a tutorial that does that, but that's the way I do mine, and it just makes things much easier. And then at the end, if you go through all that hard work, you're going to have something pretty nice at the end. You hopefully are going to have a model that is worth all your time and effort, and where the sculpting and the bits you converted and the paint job all just blend together, and it creates a very natural look. Like, hey, this is something that maybe if Games Workshop was willing to put in the time and effort, they could sell a kit that already looks like this. And it doesn't look like something that you've modified. It looks like something that could really exist in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. So, before I talk about any more models, let's talk about the actual tools that I use, because a lot of people ask me that. And so a lot of people ask me if for my stuff I use anything special, like, hey, that looks really cool texture. Do you use special tools? Do you use this, or that? There's a site in Spain called Green Stuff World. I actually just got some stuff from them today. They make a lot of really, really good tools and materials and like texture things for green stuff. And so I do use a little bit of that. On that fire raptor that I showed a minute ago, you might have noticed that there's a white kind of chaos star in the middle. And I didn't purely freehand that. I use something else. I use the Dark Ruins things from Green Stuff World. And it's just really cool. It's got like this chaos looking kind of stuff there. And it's a texture. And you can roll it over green stuff to create that. So look at that website. Look at some of the products. There's other sites that sell things like that. So I do use a little bit of that, but 99%, 95% of what I do, I'm sculpting those details myself. And I don't use, 30 different tools. I have a bunch of different sculpting tools, but usually I use the ones you see right here. The same couple that I've had for, 10 years or so that I've grown really comfortable with. And I don't use any special type of green stuff. I use, here it's like a blue and yellow one, comes from Gale Force 9. Works really well for me. So I don't use any special kind of material to make my sculpting. I really just use, I just use the Gale Force 9 basic epoxy. Comes in blue and yellow, nothing all that special. And so at the end of the day, I think you can use cool tools and do some nice stuff. But the vast majority of whether your sculpting is good or not is going to be the technique that you use and whether you took enough time to do it right. And I think of those, time is even more important than technique. So even if you've never sculpted anything before or worked on Nurgle stuff before, at least for the sculpting part, just going slowly and just even having seen some basic videos on YouTube, if you go slow and take your time, that's going to matter more than technique or skill or experience. So don't let it discourage you if you've never sculpted before. Anybody can do it. I just picked it up and started doing it one day. Had no background in it from anything else. Never took any lessons or classes. And another thing that's interesting is a lot of people assume that, like I said, that I use a bunch of different tools, but I heard something once that really interested me, and it was from someone at Games Workshop, and it might have been about, I don't remember if it was about painting or sculpting, but I thought a professional would use so many different tools to create their effect, and what this person said was something like 95% of the time, even for all the different things you see on the model, all the different techniques, I'm using the exact same tool. And after a couple of years when I was doing the same sort of thing with my sculpting, to my surprise, it was the same thing. I did vast majority of everything I did, even for, tendrils, fungus, mushrooms, clothing, robes. I did it all with the same tool. I just found a favorite that I really grew used to, and I used it a lot. And that's this one right here. If you start sculpting, I would encourage you to get one like this. It's kind of it's curved, it's got a flat part, it's got a sharp part, it's thin in one part, it's wide in another, it's round on the edges, but it's still a little sharp. You can use it to cut pieces off. And so this is what I use a lot, and anytime you see any of my fungus that looks so intricate, it's with this. And I'm just going in there, and I'm taking the tool, and I'm just going and I'm pressing and I'm twisting my hand when I press, and I'm just constantly twisting, moving around, angling it differently, and that creates a huge amount of variety. So that's why I like a tool like this, is you can make something look like it has natural, organic variety with just one tool, instead of constantly having to go in with 3 or 4 different tools and poke around. And so that's what I recommend. One other thing, though, that I do recommend if you're trying to use some different tools Let me see if I can find it here in my box. Oh, it's at the top. So I did get one thing very late on in my sculpting career. I've only used it on some models, like my Great Unclean ones. You can see it in a couple of places. If you see some of those holes, or if you go on my Facebook page and you look at my album and you see the mephitic blight haulers, where I didn't feel like sculpting the whole base like crazy by hand that much. You can get kind of just other tools that will save you some time. And so I like these. These are also from Green Stuff World. Like I said, they have a lot of good things. And you'll see here that they have different size, just kind of like ballpoints at the end. And so these are great because they're varied, so you can create variety. But if you wanted just to create kind of like a pockmarked look, you can just apply a wide amount of green stuff at once, and then just go in with a bunch of these. Put in a bunch of the big ones, then put in ones that are a little smaller around, and then put in the very small ones, and put in a lot more of those. And that's a fast way to get, a sculpted green stuff textured look without having to create every little hole by hand and mix it up by hand and think about, do I have all the right sizes right? You just press in a couple of these, and that should be really handy for you. So that's what I think about tools. I don't think you need a lot. I think a basic, 5-tool sculpting set with maybe some different tools on both ends, so you have 10 ends. That is all that you really need. You don't need a million other things. And thanks for people who joined. If you have any questions or want to throw something out there, just toss it up in the chat. If people start chatting a lot, I'll throw it on the screen, but feel free to ask any questions or say hey or put in any comments. So now let's look at some models again. Next, let's go to the, let's do another big one. Let's look at the knight and some friends. And so this is another example of some of what I talked about earlier, but I guess even more than a Fire Raptor with the Tyranid bits and stuff, this really reinforces what I think about. Never feel like something doesn't belong just because it's not from a kit that you would expect. I use Warhammer Fantasy Nurgle stuff in my Warhammer 40,000 Nurgle army all the time when I'm making these models. But I also use other things. So I use Imperial Guard and Space Marine bits. I use, medieval weapon bits from the different fantasy line models. Here on the head that I have on this Nurgle Renegade Knight, that head is from the Kickstarter exclusive for Creature Caster, for kind of one of their versions of a Great Unclean one. And the arms are from Warhammer Fantasy Glotkin, or not Glotkin, it's the Magath Lords. And then I have a lot of bits from the Death Guard Infantry. And then from the Warhammer Fantasy, heavy Nurgle Infantry. And then I have Nurglings from everywhere. And so I'm mixing bits from lots of kits. And if you look at the Helverins on the side, they have a lot of arms and pieces from the Chaos Spawn range. And then the heads are from the Plague Drones. And so I have a wide variety of stuff here, and never feel like just because something's from another kit or another range or even another company, you can't use the bit. You absolutely can. You just really dry fit it in a lot of places, think about where I might work, glue it, green stuff in the gaps, and then put the detail of green stuff textures or blending over it. And then here, one thing that I want to point out is if you're going through all the effort to customize your model anyway, and you're going through all the efforts to make it unique, put in this green stuff layer, you should probably also at that point, if you're doing so much physical work on your model, why don't you just go ahead and also magnetize it at the same time? Because you don't want to make multiple models that you have to paint in the first place, but you especially don't want to have to sculpt and convert multiple models. And so if you're doing that stuff already, at that point, just magnetize it. For me, it made a lot of sense because I pay GMM to do these beautiful commissions, and so I want to save money not just on the models that I buy, but on the models that I get commission painted. And if you're chopping up the model anyway for the converting, that's a wonderful opportunity to find places where you're going to put those magnets. And hey, guess what? You're doing a lot of green stuff work. You're doing some sculpting. You're doing some converting. That makes it easier to put in the magnets because not only are you no longer afraid to cut off parts of models to fit the magnet on, but now suddenly at this point, you are going to have the ability to just put a magnet maybe on a flat piece of plastic or resin and it sticks out, but then once the glue is dry, you can go in and green stuff all around it and detail it so no one will ever see the magnet. And at that point, when you're fitting on the arm or the weapon or whatever that's on the other side of that magnet, you can create kind of a pocket that it fits into. It slots in, and it's going to look very natural. And so here on these battle cannons, you can kind of see that I've covered everywhere where the magnets are, and I've built up to where the gun comes on. And so I'm accomplishing a lot of things at once by combining the sculpting and the magnetizing. And so just to give you another example of that, you know, here, for example, is the same model. When you're sculpting and you create your own kind of magnet areas, you can create your own openings where you just put in whatever you want. And here, these little autocannons, the Avenger cannons that I made, these are from the Molotov Forge Fiend kit. I really like them. So they have these little skulls on the end. It looks kind of like a chaos weapon. But even if it wasn't about the same, you know, diameter as the battle cannon bits, you can also always use your green stuff on the actual weapon bits and just make them a little bit bigger, a little whatever you want, or a little longer. As long as it has structural integrity and your details look fine, no one's going to be able to tell that it was something you changed once it's painted to look coherent. So let's look here at another model to see if we can go into some more different techniques. Yeah, so here's what I'll talk about. Let's talk about using sculpting to add variety. I'll throw up a couple different pictures here at the same time. These are 3 different bloat drones that are all from the starter kit. And so if you've ever made any of these, you know that it's the exact same model with the exact same pose, and it's got the exact same little details on the front, right? This is one of those just standard Games Workshop Death Guard models that it has the cuts in the same place, it has the battle damage in the same place. And so if you make 3 of these and you don't convert them any, you don't do any sculpting, I don't like it that much when all my models look the same, especially not Chaos models. Because I think the Chaos models are, you know, they all have different battle damage. Some of the models or, you know, even characters are 10,000 years old. They've been in the war. Probably they've all been transformed in different ways by the chaotic warp energy. They've developed different mutations. And so doing some of the sculpting or gluing the beads on or whatever, that is a really good way to add variety to multiple of the same models, whether they're completely identical or not in the Games Workshop base kit. So here, for example, it's the exact same model with kind of 3 different ways. One thing I did is, if you look at the tops, I just went in a couple places with my knife and chopped off details, right? And you can always add details in your conversion work, add bits to make things look more unique, but it's even faster to take stuff away. So if you're in a hurry, or you just don't have the bits or nothing seems right on those models, taking stuff away is an easy conversion trick, right? People think always about adding stuff when they're doing conversions, but they don't think about taking stuff away. And so I think that's one easy tip. And then if you look here, on some of these models, right? What I've done on these models that I like as a showcase is not only did I put green stuff in different places, but I applied it in different ways, right? So the one that's by itself here on my side in this direction, I only have a little bit of green stuff, but what I did is I took my knife and I added more damage in a lot of places and created kind of nooks and crannies. And it's a little hard to see on the model because they're dark green, but you can see it a little bit better now. I actually went into these crevices and I filled it up with these like little green beads that I had. On my Fire Raptor, you saw some white beads, but here these are like green beads, and the idea is that these are like filled with pus and disease. And so I didn't even have to do that much sculpting here. I mostly was working with my knife and my pincers and my beads that are just pre-made that I bought off the internet, and I filled them in, I glued them in, and so that's one easy way to add variety. And then on this next one here, you can see there that I did something pretty different. I just I went in and I sculpted like heavy fungus that was kind of growing all over the model. I added some mushrooms here and there to make it look more like it's rotting. And then for this last one, I didn't do any of that other stuff. Instead, I just kind of went and I used my tentacle maker. And now, again, there's an easy way to save time on this. Don't go crazy and waste a whole bunch of time trying to just do these by hand all the time, right? That is completely crazy. You don't need to go and sculpt every little line in this worm by hand. Go find a tool online that will make it easier for you. In my case, I think it was like Green Stuff Industries or Tentacle Maker, and you just take like a roll of green stuff, you flatten it, you make it like a little worm length, and then you apply 2 halves, maybe you wet them a bit, and then you just roll back and forth, and you've got a ready-made worm. And then what I do maybe is I go on the ends of the worm, what I take out, I use my sculpting tool to kind of make it kind of like sharp ends, like the end of a pencil, and those are my 2 ends of the worm. And then I use my tools very carefully to kind of just drape it where I want and move it around. And I can make worms very quickly that way. Looks great, saves me time. Much better than if I tried to do it by hand. So that's another tip. Let's see what other models we might want to throw out here. And then if you take the time and you make them all a little different, you're going to be rewarded, because then you've got like this 3 very, very different looking models. And people, especially if you add, like here I've got a Nurgling on one of them you can't see it, there's Nurgling running in the back. Now you've got 3 Death Guard Bloatrones that are from the kind of easy to fit kit that all look the same. It was cheap to buy 3 of them, and because of the converting and the sculpting work, you wouldn't be able to tell that normally all 3 look exactly the same. And obviously the bases help for that as well, putting them on different sides of the base. And my bases are all from Secret Weapon. So that's another tip. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to spend time, making your own bases, sculpting them, building them. Just find one of these great websites like Secret Weapon where they come pre-made. Find a theme that you like, and then just use it for everything. So let's see, what else are we gonna showcase here? We are gonna go into let's look at this. So another thing to think about sculpting is a lot of times, in terms of deciding what I want to sculpt and make and convert, it's just a question of saving money for me. I don't want to go and buy the kit when I have something at home where with a little bit of green stuff and some time, I can make my own version. And then it's going to be cool because I'll always have my own part of it, and then I can magnetize it. So I really wanted an Epidemius model, but I didn't like how the normal one looked. I didn't want to pay a bunch of money for it. Sometimes it wasn't in stock, and so I made my own. I made my own Palanquin of Nurgle, and I just dug in my bits box. And green stuff, micro beads, different Nurgling bits from the Nurgling kit. Let me make one. And then, on the top part there, I didn't green stuff all that. that would be a huge waste of time. I green stuffed quite a bit and a thick layer at the top, but the base of it is I just took a piece of terrain, like a ledge on a ruin, and I cut it into a triangle shape, and I flattened it and put it on some flattened parts of the Nurgling tower there on 3 sides. And then that gave me the foundation that I put a lot of just green stuff over to just fit, and then I put the final layer over it that I sculpted in detail, like I talked about with the Fire Raptor. And the advantage of doing it yourself like this is then you'll see in the middle there, that guy I can use as a normal Plague Bearer. And I also have it magnetized on both sides, and I have a, the Furge World Death Guard Sorcerer guy, Necrosius. I have his base magnetized as well in case I ever want to run an Index Chaos Sorcerer on Palaquid so that he gets a demon keyword. So if you're trying to get multiple uses out of one model that you're going to paint or commission, or you just want to save money, I think that's another really good way to guide yourself on what do I want to spend my time converting, where is it worth it in my army. Saving money is one of the main things that I think about when I do that. Let's take a look at this Rhino, and then we'll wrap it up in just a few minutes. But here in this Rhino, you're going to see that with some sculpting, you can really, and some converting, you can turn anything into a Chaos or a Nurgle model. So this is actually, it looks the same as any plastic or resin kit now that all the sculpting and the converting and the painting has been done, but this is actually an MDF kit. It's called the Scuttle Tank, and it comes looking kind of Chaos, but not much. If you look closely there at the top, you'll see that the kind of the opening hatch in the top back is supposed to be a Chaos Star, but with this paint, you can't really see it. But it didn't look that chaosy, and so I put all this other stuff on there. Fungus, mold, worms, Nurglings, tusks, rotting logs, some iconography. But you can transform anything if you're willing to think about what are the creative steps to get it there so it looks like a coherent part of my army. And one thing in particular that I want to point out on this model is you'll see on the side there this kind of white part that looks like a bunch of flesh and teeth coming out the front, right down there at the very bottom. And that is just like a random half a side of one arm, I think, from like the Glotkin part. And so you never think, a partial part of an arm is going to go on the side of this Rhino Scuttle Tank. And it looked kind of weird when I just glued it on, but I knew that I could green stuff in the gaps and then texture over them, and then with the paint job, it would look organic and natural, like the tank is just growing some flesh and some teeth on the side of it. So when you have that freeing ability to just green stuff on and blend in any bit, don't be limited. Use your imagination and just think, anything on it that I've got on here, I could put on here if I really want to. So the question isn't, can I do it? The question is, will it look good at the end, or will it look forced? And so for that part, you might want to defer to smaller bits rather than a bunch of big bits, right? The Glotkin has this big, huge tendril arm, and I see a lot of people just kind of glue that willy-nilly to a knife or something like that. It can look good, but think carefully. When in doubt, go with smaller bits that you add in, and you just add lots of small bits and sculpt those all in. I would defer to that rather than just trying to stick on a bunch of really big pieces. I'd rather even chop up a big piece and use it in multiple places or something like that. And though that brings me, I think, to kind of the last thing I wanted to show you guys, which is just a couple more models here. So, at the end of the day, you look at green stuff and sculpting and converting as a way of making your models completely unique, right? I can very confidently say no one in the world really has model themes that look exactly like this, and there's been a couple people who have combined some of these kits to create similar models, but mine are still going to be pretty different than theirs. And then I look for the extra touch, right? Like, how can I make it look even more different but still look natural? So why don't I put that rider guy on one of the 3 Mauler Fiends from the Glockin kit and put him on top, and then I sculpted like a little, you know, like a seat that he's riding on that blends in with what he comes with on that little rider piece, but also then on the rest of the Mauler Fiend kit. And I just always looked at see what can I add as details that doesn't look forced, doesn't look like there's too many things I added, but will just make my model more and more unique. And of course, at the end of the day, the paint job will help out with that too. But use your time as sculpting, converting to really express yourself as a hobbyist. Really embrace, in this case, what is a Nurgle. Make it look more sick, make it look more aggressive, make it look more mutated. Add Nurglings everywhere. Try to use some of the same bits or little things like Nurglings across the whole army so that your infantry and your vehicles and your monsters are all going to be pretty similar. So here, I've got some Nurglings riding some of these Mauler Fiends, but I also have a Nurgling on top of that on both of my Demon Princes there from Creature Caster. I have them on the Rhino, and you just kind of see how it all blends together. But the number one thing for me personally is I would like to have my converting and sculpting work make my army unique, and so that I know I can go to any shop in the world with my army, and people want to see my models because they're unique. And it also just makes it more fun to play with, right? You're like, I'm moving up this Mauler Fiend, but by the way, it's crawling with Nurglings. They're probably going to bite you when I get into melee too. Just add a little bit of narrative flair, a little bit of that hobby love to your work, and even to your games, even at something like a tournament. And so that's really all that I wanted to talk about. I hope I covered a wide variety of my tips and techniques and tricks, and just more importantly than any of that, the philosophy behind how I go from a model A to Z, from design to implementation to refinement to the finished model that's ready for painting. So if you guys are here, I see a couple of people are watching. Feel free to throw questions in the chat. Let me know if you want advice on anything, if you have any models that you enjoyed sculpting or converting, any bits that you really like. A lot of people ask me for advice or for tutorials on my Facebook page. So if you want to ask something and you're watching, now's your chance to ask me whatever you want about sculpting, converting, Nurgle tricks. Just throw it up in the YouTube chat there, and I'll answer any questions you have. I never knew before I started this YouTube channel how dry your throat can get. Well, doesn't look like anybody wants to ask any questions tonight, but if you guys come up with something or you watch this later when it's not on the live stream, feel free to go just type in the comments to the videos. If you look at episode, oh, you know what? I just didn't even notice it now until the very end. Somehow I threw up the wrong screen in the background for quite a bit of this. On one part of this, I never changed the background text, so that's a good lesson for me to make sure that I do that in the future, that I have it on the promo photo and on the real thing. So maybe I shouldn't have said anything because then it would have been a little less obvious, but you live and learn, right? So thank you guys for watching tonight. Really appreciate it. I will see you guys next time. If you have any questions, just throw them in the comments of the YouTube video. I answered a lot of questions in the week or two following episode 3. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Appreciate you. And if you liked it, make sure you subscribe and ask your friends to subscribe. See you later.